Record to the cloud.
Now I'm hoping that I'm not going to be too basic with what I'm doing here, because basically what I'm going to be showing off, what I'm going to be showing is basically thread control, which if you can't control your thread, your flies are they're going to be okay. Fish really don't care, but you will. And if you don't, if the fly is not up to what you want, you're not going to fish it. And if it isn't in the water, it's not going to catch fish.
Sure. So we just started recording, so I wanted to let everybody know that's tuning in later and it's not here live. This is Andrew Marshall. He's
hello.
Hello. He's kind of in my opinion, a fly tying guru. He's kind of known, at least in his area for sure, and with some other people too that I've got some respect for sure.
Thank you.
For tying in hand and just doing some really neat things. He's got some really he's got a broad range of fly tying knowledge, and he's got a lot of experience in it. So that's why we brought him on. So thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
And and so so this is fly tying for beginners. So take it basic, and take it to where you think a beginner should be and know and learn. And so what does that look like for you?
Well, the first thing,
when you're starting out with thread control.
Okay, so yeah, the first thing you need to know is thread control, and I've put a large gold hook here. I normally tell people who want to know, start small, because if you start small, it's easier to get bigger. But if you start large, it's going to be harder to go smaller because you're going to be crowding the hook. You can always spread out your materials, but at the same time, it's harder to make them smaller. The reason I put a gold hook up here is because I'm going to be using black floss to show the different things you can do with thread. So that way, hopefully you can see it, because with the thread, it's going to, I don't know if you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to use floss, French silk floss, because I can twist it and flatten it and all sorts of other things. So I got to put my goggles down so I can actually see what I'm doing now, which means you guys are all blurry. I can't see a thing at your end. Okay, so so that you've got you start with your thread. Most thread is twisted. This being flat silk floss, it isn't. But I wanted it that way so you can see it. So to tie on, basically what I do is I just fold the thread over the hook, wrap back on itself, and you can see how I'm laying the threads next to each other just to tie on. For people who tie, this is dead simple. For a lot of people, a lot of new tiers, getting the thread to just do that sends them into like, what on earth are you doing there? There you go. Thread control. So once you've got the thread on there, depending on what you're actually tying, thread is usually twisted. So you've got the thread on there. You can spin it. By spinning it, and it's going to take a little bit longer. Oops. Being floss, it's not as easy to do as with thread, but I want to, like I said, I'm demonstrating here with it so you can see on a large scale what I'm doing. So by spinning it, now if I want to have real tight wraps, unlike the last ones which are flat, I can spin it, and now I have, see what I'm doing there with the thread? Now I've got actual texture with this floss to the underbody. You want depending on what you want for your fly, your underbody, with thread control, you're building up an underbody that has to be smooth. Okay, if you're doing quill-bodied flies or pretty much anything other than dubbing, and dubbing hides an awful lot of sins, but even with dubbing, you want a nice smooth underbody. But you want that so that the stuff you put over it, your tinsel or your quill or whatever, lays out smooth and even, because you're imitating a fish or you're imitating a fly body, an insect body or something like that. They don't have unnecessary ugly lumps. They may not be the most beautiful looking creature, but your fish is a sleek, smooth creature designed for swimming in water. It's not going to have lumps all over it as you would get if you're making an underbody that looks something along the lines of, I'll do a real sloppy job here. So you get this and you sort of throw together like so and call that, oh, that's good enough, right? Well, when you wrap over it, your threads are going to fall and it's going to make for, see how, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, But see how ugly and lumpy that is? Can you guys actually see what I'm doing there?
Well, I can see it. Do you have a way to zoom in a tad more?
Not without moving the laptop closer. And I put the pedestal on the laptop. Unfortunately, it's on the keyboard, and it made everything go completely bonkers, which is why it's set up right as it is here. I
That's
know what
okay.
I'll do.
Would it help if I followed along and zoomed in on my camera?
Can you do that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Give me just a second. Let me get a bigger hook out here, and I can follow along. So why I'm kind of stalling, I guess. So what is the difference between, say, like a French? Because I don't really know this. What is the difference, say, between like a French silk floss and then this uni floss that's made in Germany? Is there a significant difference? Is it?
I haven't used the German stuff, but I don't imagine that there's much difference. I do know that, for example, with the Japanese floss is much finer and it feels drier and much finer. This stuff is more heavy. I use this stuff for steelhead flies, for some of the nymphs that I use, where I'm wrapping ribs out of this stuff because it's more coarse. I think the German probably is the same. I don't know who makes it or who actually manufactured it, because I don't think Uni actually makes their own silk. I know that they're not the same as the Japanese stuff. Okay.
Oh, come on. Sorry, I got this cheap bobbin that I use for stuff like this, and they actually
what I could do maybe is I could trim this and see if I can. I mean, I could do this in hand. It's just the problem is with in hand, I don't have any way to put it into catch because there's no gut underneath it. I'm tying on an eyed hook, but I've done this before. So let's see if I can actually do that. So let's.
Okay, so you're starting your floss out fine and then turning it into a rope. Is that what you're doing?
Well, okay, let me get back on the thing here. So what I've done is okay, I got to see what you're doing now. So yeah, so the floss, when you lay it on first, it's flat. It lays on flat, okay? And then if you spin it, it turns into almost a rope, okay? And so and I was demonstrating
like that.
You can, right. And by doing that, you can see different textures. You can create, depending on how tightly you spin it or how widely you spread it out, you can create a different texture of underbody. You really, and depending, like if you have, if you're weighting your hook and you put like lead-free wire and you want to wrap around it and build up a taper, you could spin it at each end of the wire and then slowly flatten it out as you go from either end to make a tapered, almost a football shaped body before you wrap over it, if you know what I'm saying.
I do.
That's an idea. Yeah. And that way it kind of, I should have thought of that and brought some over here myself.
Hey, that's
yeah,
okay.
You're doing exactly right.
You know what? We're kind of new to this, so this is like you are our first interview. So I had kind of thought in the back of my mind, because we've been talking now for probably a month or more now, I think, about doing this. So I kind of had in the back of my mind that maybe this would be something that we needed to do, and that's no problem whatsoever. So when you attach your thread, you see how flat that is.
You see how flat that is, yeah. And so
and that's, you can wrap it all the way like this.
Right, and then you can spin
your body. You spin it.
Yeah, you can spin it, and now you can use that to build up. So that way it's yeah. And so you want to take and make sure your lead stays in play, or your wire stays in place. There you go. So you can build up a taper around that. There you go. Yeah. It makes for a more even, a nicer looking underbody like that.
And then just build the taper up on this side to kind of provide like a ramp.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And so by twisting and untwisting, flattening and unflattening, you can build up a nice smooth, and then you can dub
Ooh,
over
boy,
that.
Boy, they got frayed.
Yeah, it does when you're running it through the bobbin there. That's generally, I mean, I normally don't have silk in my bobbin. I just put it on here to demonstrate for you guys.
Right? Yeah, I do use my floss with my hand.
Yeah, so do I. But I happen to have a spool of it handy and thought, well, this would be much better to demonstrate with, especially on these gold hooks. You can see the contrast between the two. So.
And so every few turns, that's kind of what I have to do with mine. Every few turns, I gotta open it back up, meaning I have to spin it back flat.
Right.
That's
and
really
so,
flat. You can see my.
Yeah, and that's the idea. I mean, that's the basic concept of thread control. Is
Well, this is tough with floss, man.
it is.
I've never done it with floss. I've done it a ton with thread, but I have not done it with floss. Much more difficult than thread for sure. At least in the opening go here.
Yeah, but see the results. I mean, you're now, the wire is underneath there, okay, and it's not the prettiest, but it's an underbody, and you're not going to be wrapping. You're not going to be wrapping. You're not going to be wrapping tinsel over that. You're going to be dubbing over it anyway. Okay,
right.
That's what I said. You know, dubbing covers a multitude of little errors like that. Well, not exactly errors, but it covers a multitude of that sort of a thing. You know what I mean? Imperfections, right. I should say. But at the same time, doing that makes it a lot easier than trying to. I mean, you could dub straight over if you wanted. Okay, but then when you're wrapping your tinsel, like if you the gold ribbed hare's ears nymph, you want it heavily weighted, so you're wrapping your tinsel from the back forward. And if you just got dubbing and then the wire that's been dubbed over, your tinsel is going to affect the turns and how the tinsel lays down, and whether the tinsel after you've tied it off stays in place, or whether the first good tug of a fish pulls all your tinsel down.
Yeah, and so when that happens, I've always thought that that's due to an uneven segment right where the larger portion of material, this case being wire, is.
Yes.
So then that gold tinsel just happens to catch, and when you're pulling it, you're pulling through the dubbing, and then if it's just a soft underbody, say like thread, I mean, you could literally be increasing the pressure, pulling that up, and then providing yourself, I mean, just the slightest gap, you know, like I've got all through here, for that tinsel to catch, and then mess up a wrap.
Yeah,
I've noticed that. I've noticed that as well with dry flies. When you're wrapping hackle on dry flies for your wings, or you know, for your actual hackle, that if that thorax part is not either tapered well or even, this hackle tends to want to move forward and slide down.
Yes.
Towards the eye, which can be a real nightmare to deal with, especially towards the end of a fly.
It is, and if you're using the rolled wood duck, divided wood duck wings, after you've gone to the trouble of creating, you know, you tie it in and back and forth to smooth it out, and you wrap your quill over it, and you've gone to great lengths to make the perfect strip peacock quill body on your wood duck wings, and then you got to lay the hackle down, and the hackle just won't cooperate because the buildup underneath there is not right. It can be incredibly frustrating, and that's all thread control and how you build up your underbody before you wrap over everything else. Because once that underbody's down, if it's not right, everything else that's laid on it is not going to be right. It just isn't going to work. It may work in the end, but the frustration you get by having to compensate for errors that you didn't take care of in the early stages is going to spoil the fun. You're not going to fish the flies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're not going to want to do a lot of things as you intend them to do, whether that's lay correctly on the water or
right. Exactly.
Just proportion, or if you're doing like we've got some classes coming up on like deer and elk hair, which can be important too, to make sure that you've got a decent. I'm trying to get one in my hand here.
Well, you get so many of the newbies.
Just a decent place for that hair to rest.
Right, exactly.
I guess in this case, what I do sometimes is I'll actually build up a little bump just behind where I want that hair to stand, so that it gives it a little prop to shoot up, or help shoot it up. So I guess that'd be kind of a different kind of thread control.
Well, what I do is so I've got the hackle down, and I put the wing on. So I do a couple turns on the wing and pull it tight to make it like you do a muddler type wing, pull it tight. And then I pull back on the front bit and wrap underneath it and tie off there. And that lifts the front bit up there, and that to trim it off. So you've got your deer hair head at the front of that.
Oh, that's cool. I'm not sure I've seen anybody do that before.
Well, it's one of those things, nobody really taught me how to do it. So I just sort of figured out, because the one thing that I'm kind of maybe pedantic in this, but you've got the head that's at the front of the fly. And especially when I was younger, that was quite literal. That's where everything was tied off, is right there behind the eye at the front. So I could not understand the idea that you could tie off anywhere except right at the end, right there behind the eye. So naturally, you tie the wing down, a couple of wraps there to pull it nice, to get it nice and tight, get it to flare the way you want it, and then pull it up, bring it underneath there, make your head and finish it. It works, It's a little bit harder to do when you want to take and throw some hackle over the wing there between the wing and the head, and I've done that sometimes, but it works. So, yeah, I like that. And sometimes I'll even
dry flies.
Yeah, sometimes I'll even have the, like on the elk hair caddis that you showed with the little tuft of deer hair at the front that's been trimmed. Sometimes I'll even leave that and just put the turns of hackle in between the wing and that, so I've got a head on top of what you've got there. Just depends on what I feel like.
Sort of like an elk hair caddis with a stimulator finish or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's, if I want a fly that'll sit a little higher, that I can fish in faster, or, in white water, throw that extra hackle on there, make it stay up just long enough, or just that much longer before either something takes it or it drowns and I have to dry it off and put a new one on, or I lose it on a bush or something. I lose an awful lot of flies on bushes. So I think that's why I keep tying them. But yeah. going back to thread control, though, the whole concept of it, and making your underbodies, perfect, so that the rest of it will work out the way it wants to. So many newbies, they don't really talk about this in the books and things. And so the newbies, they buy the books and they buy a bunch of materials and they sit down and they try to figure it out, and they wonder why it just doesn't work out. It doesn't look like what the pictures are in the book. And nobody sits down with them and shows them how to bind on the thread. Nobody sits there and says, okay, you've got to lay your wraps one after the other, after the other, after the other, next to next to next to next. If you want a smooth, thin, you can unspin your thread and flatten it out. Or if you want a real tight, slightly ridged body, you can spin it the other way and make a rope out of it and lay that out. You can play with your thread to create an underbody, but all of it is you've got to lay your underbody. You've got to build up this foundation so that everything else that goes afterwards works. And that's just not spelled out in ways, at least I've not seen in the books that I've got, where it's all put in one place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, actually I do. And I think that's actually a really valid point, because it took me a long time I would hear people talk about thread control on some of the videos or whatever you'll find on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I'd sit there and start watching them and say, well, what are they talking about thread control? I don't, because when you're getting into it, you're like, boy, it doesn't register with me. What is it? But so it literally probably took me, I'd say probably 2.5, 3 years before I I think it was actually Barry Ord Clark, one of his videos that I finally came across.
He's a good guy. Yep.
Where he actually explained, he's got his Dyneema on, and he's like, so you twist it counterclockwise 5 times, you make your 6 wraps or whatever he says, and then you twist it again, right? But now I'm going to tie on this one material, so I want that in a rope, and he'll twist it back into a rope.
Yep.
So can you talk about that maybe? So like, when is it more appropriate to flatten your thread as opposed to say using a flat thread or a rope thread to tie in a material?
Okay. So when I initially bind on, I use a rope thread because I want because I want that thread to grip itself onto the hook with a minimum amount of turns, because I want to minimize bulk, but a maximum amount of grab. And if the thread is flattened, you're going to get space, but you're not going to get as much grab as if it's tightened up in ropes that can grab itself. Okay. After that, it all depends on what I want, what the underbody is. If I'm tying soft hackle wet flies, for example, okay, if I want a real slender body, then I'll unspin it and flatten it out and take it down to the just above the bend, and then take it back, and I've got a body that's nice and slender. Okay, if I want a fatter body, or if I want to, the other thing you could do, you could so fatter body, take it down, rope it and take it down, or you could flatten it, take it down and rope it and bring it back. You could take it down flat and then split it, put some dubbing in there, and bring that back. Make a kind of a. In fact, let me get my goggles down here so I can actually see. The problem is when my glasses are up, I can see you guys, but when the glasses are down, I can see the hook, but I can't see you guys. And it's either one or the other. But with the dubbing here, I can take, and where's my pick? I just set my pick down, didn't I? There it is. Okay, so I can take now, and I've got this. Now, this is something you have difficulty doing on your modern, really narrow threads, but you can use the older threads, which are wide. You can take and split your floss, or split your thread, okay? And you can take a little bit of dubbing. You can take and put that in there.
Sorry, I'm just doing it because we can't get Andrew's camera to zoom in, so I'm just following along with you.
So you take a bit of dubbing there, and you can spin that. And the next thing you know, you've got a rough, almost a hackle, if you will, that you can wrap. And this is one way if you want really buggy looking dubbed bodies. Okay, you can do this kind of a dubbing technique. Okay, when you're tying.
So you find that, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you find that easier to produce like a buggy body is with the split thread technique, as opposed to say like a dubbing loop?
It all depends on what I'm looking at. If I'm tying the Polly Rosborough flies, the hackle on those are the nymphs that he tied, such as the casual dress, for example, or I think he's got another one. But the whole thing is done with fur, and so the body I'll do with a dubbed body, just your standard dub body. But the hackle I'll take and either do a dubbing loop, a folded thread dubbing loop, or I'll just split the thread and put the dubbing in there and spin that. Either way, and it will create. I'll leave the guard hairs in, and it creates this lovely hair hackle. It depends on the effect that you want to create. But it's all, if you were to in terms of grade, like what grade of thread control this would be, this is more the advanced controlling of the thread, because you have to understand the mechanics of what you're doing, the flattening and the twisting of the thread, in order to understand you can put things in between, you can split the thread and put things in between it to get these other effects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Matter of fact, we've got our next series is going to be on, so it's going to be like just straight deer and elk hair. And and so I put together some patterns that obviously would kind of exploit just using deer and elk because it's kind of tough. But it's the same thing, on the dubbing technique with this blending of dubbing that I'm using. So I mean, so I'm getting that bushy effect, and that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Right. I've got a fly similar to that I call green rockworm. It's done on a curved scud hook, and I've got the olive dubbing. But as a rib, I will use the dark olive green French silk, and over that I'll use fine oval gold thread. So I make a nice coarse hairy dubbing in kind of a tapered worm shape, and then I'll take and rope the silk and wrap that over to make your segments. Now silk, I use real silk rather than the artificial stuff, the polyester, whatever it is, the nylon stuff, because real silk, when it gets wet, darkens, it changes color. And so depending on what is underneath it, you get effects. Like the olive can turn darker or lighter depending on what the underfur is. And since I'm using a dark olive underfur, it sort of blends in and becomes more natural, if that makes sense. And then the gold thread is over it to make the actual lines, if you will, between the segments that you'd normally see on a bug body. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's definitely getting technical.
And then for the head, I'll take and split the thread and put, because I'm using dark hare's ears, I'll take the hair right out of the inner part of the ear, the really dark, short stuff, and put that into the split thread and spin that real tight. And that's like 3 turns of that on a hook, and there's my head right there. It's one of the simplest little rockworms, and I've taken some amazing fish out of the Deschutes in Central Oregon with that thing. And that was a pattern that I just came up with because I'm sitting there on the bank of the river in the middle of nowhere thinking, okay, somebody said they're taking rockworms and they're not taking the stuff I normally would be fishing, the hare's ears nymphs and the green drakes and things, and we're 2 weeks past the salmon fly, so they're full, they're not really wanting anything, but they said rockworms. Okay, I've got all this olive stuff, what can I come up with? And so that's what I came up with and threw it at them, and they liked it, which was a surprise to me.
Very cool. So, so obviously, so if everybody that's just joining us or whatever, this is Andrew Marsall. He's been so kind to spend some time with us and try to help teach thread control. We're going to open it up to questions here in a little bit. And he's got a chartered fishing trip tomorrow we don't want him to miss. So when it comes to actual thread control and the threads that you use, can you talk a little bit about that and what threads you find better than others?
So as a kid, I used to use whatever I could get hold of. So I started with thread I stole out of my mother's sewing box. It has the advantage in that it's 3 or 4 strand. You can split it. You can split it and split it and split it, and you can tie off different. You can use it for all sorts of different things. Now I use the Uni 8/0 in black, or red, or white. I don't really, or olive. Those are the 4 colors I generally use, and it's this stuff right here. And that's about all I really use. If I'm looking for effects, occasionally I will use my silk floss, like I've been showing you. But most of the time I do that in hand because, well, it's silk floss. It tends to fray and get all ratty looking going through the bobbin, and it's not really what I want. When I'm doing the in-hand 17th century stuff, then I use Pearsall's gossamer, and that's all done in hand.
I gotta back you up there. What is Pearsall? I don't know. Would you say Pearsall's Gossamer?
Pearsall's gossamer silk thread.
Okay. What is that?
That is the thread that they used to use back in. Well, let's see. Pearsall's first came about in. Well, I know they were using it in the 1800s. I'm not sure how early into the 1800s. The company has recently been sold. I think it's sold to Langley. So this is the stuff I'm using now. Langley thread is where I get it. It's the same exact stuff. It's just under the Langley name. It's a superfine silk thread. I don't know if you can see that there. Superfine silk thread. This is heavier than your A-dot. It's more like 2 sizes up from the A-dot. It's a bit thicker. This is the advantage. You can split it.
Yep, we're breaking up. We're breaking up just a fuzz.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get our connection back.
So, but that's basically the two main threads that I use. Is Marsall's Gossamer.
Is it just me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not breaking up at all for me.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure if it was my connection breaking everybody up or if it's just me. Okay, so currently it's just me. So you said it's the Langley.
So yeah, Langley is now the company, but it originally used to be Pearsalls, 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 and good luck finding this stuff. The prices are just going up exponentially on a regular basis. I'm just lucky that way back when I didn't have the money, I bought a whole lot of it. At that time I shouldn't have, because I didn't have the money spare. Because now that I do, you can't find you. I mean, you really can't find it. The last time I looked on eBay, they want $15 for a spool that size. Yeah, wow. Forget that. But it is pure silk. It's lovely stuff. But for the sort of fly tying that we do, generally taking it out on the river and having fun with it, forget it. You're not going to need it. I use it strictly for recreating the 16th, 17th, and 18th, 19th century stuff and the Atlantic salmon flies and things like that, where that's when I get into, you have to have exactly what they had on the hook 200 years ago. You know what I mean? And you're not going to have any synthetics on that stuff. For most of the stuff that I do, it's just the uni A-dots, black thread right there. Okay, and so I've seen a lot of posts in other groups saying, from just random individuals saying that, because uni is a woven thread and it won't spin flat. And so, I don't know, I've always kind of found that uni will spin flat. Yeah, I find it takes a little extra work. Yeah, I find it spins just fine for me. No, I find it spins just fine for me. It takes a little bit of me remembering which direction to spin it to make it flatten out, but it does. It's not super flat like what we were doing earlier with the silk floss. The reason I put the silk floss up there is because you can exaggerate just how flat you can get to demonstrate the concept that. Sure. If I tried to show that with the uni, I know what I can see because my eyeballs are almost right on top of it, but you guys can't even see my vise really. And I was going to demonstrate a size 16 black ostrich nymph, which is all just thread and ostrich. But if you can't even see the hook real well, it's going to be hard to demonstrate that. But it is the ultimate in thread control on a lethal pattern. I'll give it a shot if you can see it. Can you guys see that, or is that too small? Yeah, it's pretty small. Let's see if I can. I'm gonna tip the screen forward and see if I can get the camera to come closer. Or is that just making it go up the screen? It's just making it go up the screen. Oh, okay. Well, let's see if I can put the. I'm gonna see if I can put the pedestal on the keyboard here, right in front of it. That'll bring the. I just hope it doesn't bugger things up. Okay. Can you see that better? Yes. Okay, and it's not messing up the video or nothing? It doesn't appear to be. Okay, so. Maybe I'll get a random message. Okay, so tying on is taken. The problem is now I'm out of range. I can barely see it. Okay, so. Okay, yeah, that's my computer saying that there's something on the keyboard. So I'm taking there, and notice how I'm tying. Okay, that's my computer. It doesn't like this. Okay. So. Well, just take it off the computer and just keep going, and you can kind of explain it. And okay, basically what it is just 2 layers of thread. Okay, it's a tiny little midge nymph. It's a size 16. Which back when I first learned to tie, size 16 was the average size of what I tied, 9 for 8 furrow, Mustad size 16. I say start small because when I started getting larger, like a size 12, those things were huge. Okay. But anyway, back to the nymph. In Seattle on Green Lake, there is a hatch in the spring of chironomids. And these flies are about half an inch long. They're big. And the trout go absolutely nuts for them. But you can throw your chironomids out there and they won't take them. So I'm watching this old guy. This is, I was a kid back then, watching this old guy catching one fish after another. So finally I went up to him and says, because it's in the evening and the fishing, I mean, he's doing great. And I says, what are you doing? And he showed me this lovely little nymph. It's 2 wraps of thread. You tie on at the front and you wrap back to the bend, and then you wrap over it forwards. And it has to be absolutely smooth. And then for a hackle, so let me bring it back forward here. For a hackle, all you do is you take your black ostrich herl, one strand of it, and you wrap 2 or maybe 3 turns of black ostrich herl as your hackle and tie off.
And so for your lake on this hatch, it has to be black?
For Green Lake, it's got to be black, but I've tied this thing with black and white thread. I've tied it with red. I've tied it with green. And so like with red, with a red hackle, green with a white hackle. So white ostrich, and green with green dyed ostrich. And size 16 is ideal. And the beauty of this, besides being really fast and cheap and easy to tie, okay, is that it is absolutely lethal pretty much everywhere I've tried it. And you can cast it not just with a fly rod, but if you're fishing like I was when I was young, which was with a spinning rod and a casting bubble, you can flip this thing out on the end of a leader, wait until the ripples all die down, and then bring it back really slow, and the fish will hammer it time after time after time, and it's almost impossible to damage. So you can catch 100 flies with this, or sorry, 100 fish with this fly quite easily, okay? And it's almost indestructible. And then when you get tired of it, you can tie another one. And if you lose it, so what? It's just 2 inches of thread and a 1-inch piece of hackle or a piece of ostrich hair or herl. But anyway, there's the fly. You see what I mean?
Okay, so I'm trying to follow along quickly. I had to pull some stuff out just so I can kind of follow along with you, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I've tied some stuff that's very similar.
Okay.
I can honestly tell you I haven't caught crap on it, but I have a buddy that catches stuff on all of my mistakes and makes me look horrible. So
Well, that's good. Here. See, that's good to know, because I tie all these lovely flies, like my steelhead flies. Everybody says I tie fantastic steelhead flies. I love the flies I tie. They look great. I will take them out, show them to the steelhead, and they will come up and look at them very carefully and then turn around and leave. Okay? And I've stood at the head of a hole and fishing over about a dozen or more steelhead, and I can see them and they can see me, and I'll give them every fly in the box. They don't want them.
You know, I've actually done that a few times. Yeah, I know exactly. A couple of years back, I was fishing up on the Platte River in Colorado, and I got out. I managed to make my way out to this rock, kind of towards the middle, but it was like in a back eddy, but like right by the current. And I could look. The water's so clear. I could look down, and it's probably an 8-foot pool. And I can look down, and I can see these browns actively feeding. And there was probably a dozen of them, and they're all like 20-inch browns. And I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to catch some. I literally, I kid you not, I spent an hour and a half throwing everything I had at them, and they wanted none of it, nothing.
Yep. And then
it's insane.
Then I give my flies to somebody else, the same ones I've been throwing out there, right? So I give them to somebody else and leave, and the fish start taking them like
makes you feel pretty foolish. So I want to catch up with you. So I've got my thread on here.
Okay. So
and so I'm just doing all this on a size 12 for demonstration.
right.
So,
So you
how far
back to the
do I go?
bend.
Back to the bend.
So right. Yep. Back to the bend, and the wraps have to be tight and smooth.
Touching. Tight.
Yep.
Tight and touching.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
And then when you get to the bend, wrap again forward, exactly tight and touching.
So I don't know if I can, let me see if I can zoom in on this so everybody can see. So I am using the same thread that he's using, which is the Uni 8/0. And so I know that this is what he's talking about, that the thread will actually lay flat.
Yep, perfect. That's lovely.
I'm glad that I actually have somebody else besides me say, yeah, hey, that does wrap flat if you're patient with it, because there's a lot of hubbub about that sometimes in groups saying, oh, Uni won't lay flat because it's a woven thread, and it's just not true. So anyway, side note. So go back forward.
So now go forward to where you started. Tight, yep, exactly, tight and smooth like that. Now, one of the advantages to knowing that you can do this and being able to do it is when you spin your deer hair, if you're using a tightly woven or tightly roped thread, you're going to slice through a lot of that deer hair. Okay, when you pull that, when you're doing a muddler type fly and you pull down to flare the deer head, it's going to cut a lot of that thread. But if you use a flatter thread, or if you take an untwist and flatten your thread, you're not going to slice through so much. It's going to press it and flare your deer hair better. Does that make sense?
It does. And just so everybody can see, I know, Shane, you jumped in a little late. So when you rotate your thread, this was the beginning of the conversation. When you rotate your thread after it's tied on, you can rotate it counterclockwise and open the thread up, just meaning that you can get your thread to lay flat, like I have here. And then you can also twist it counterclockwise and turn it into a rope. And so that, anyway, just so if anybody had any questions about that part. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do this, and then we'll open it up to questions from anybody that wants to ask them.
Okay. And
I'm moving. There we go.
while you're catching up, I'll show you what you're going to end up with. Okay. Can you guys? Okay. So can you see what I've got there? That's all there is to it. And this little fly.
Can you move it to like your left or your right so it's like facing your background? Yeah, there you go.
That little fly has caught more trout for me, and it's also caught bluegill and small bass. But this fly has caught more fish for me than every single other fly I've ever fished.
Amazing. And
in lakes, this is my go-to fly. So.
So where do you tie in your hackle? About the 1/3
about
mark?
About right there where you're at. Because you're only going to do 3, depending on the density or the plushness of your ostrich herl. You're going to take one strand of it and do 3, at most 4 turns of ostrich and call it good. Yeah, that looks pretty fluffy. So probably 3, 4 at most of your ostrich.
Okay.
And you have a rotary vise.
I hope it's fluffy. I overpaid for it at Hobby Lobby. It better be fluffy.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. It better be fluffy.
So, all right.
I used to work
behind the eye? Behind the eye?
Yep, you used to leave your thread where it's at and just wrap 3 wraps or 4 wraps of your ostrich forward and just tie it off. It's done. You see, I used to work at a casino, so on Halloween, they'd always, and Christmas and other holidays, they have decorations. And a lot of the time, they would have ostrich feather decorations. Valentine's Day was a great one because I could get big red ostrich feathers and big white ostrich feathers. Halloween, I got black ones and orange ones. Okay. There was one holiday where I got blue ones. It may have been 4th of July, but I made out like a bandit in terms of ostrich feather decorations. And afterwards, of course, I just throw them away. So I salvage, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, there you go. That's it right there. There you go. Now, if you want variation on that, you can use chartreuse green thread with a white hackle. All the hackle is going to be ostrich. So white ostrich hackle. You can use an olive either light or dark or both. You know, you can do some in light and some in dark, and use either a white or a matching olive ostrich hackle. You can use red thread and a red hackle. You can use red thread and a white hackle. I've also done the black one there with 2 turns of black and 1 turn of white. Cheap and easy to tie, and the variations are endless, but my go-to is always straight black like that, and that's what he showed me he was using. This was how many years? This was almost 40 years ago, so he's probably dead by now, but I'm sure he would be happy to know that his fly lives on, and now I passed it on to you guys, pass it on to everybody else, because it's amazing how this is one of the flies when I was tying commercially, nobody wanted it. I could turn these things out in about 10 seconds a piece. Nobody wanted it because it was so simple they couldn't sell it. It doesn't matter how lethal it is, they couldn't sell it, right? But yeah, it's absolutely lethal. You know, you have a bunch of those in different variations, and a lot of the time you don't need anything else.
That's very cool.
Yep, there you go. That's it right there.
So this is on a size 12, not a 16 like Andrew had. So I had to put 4 turns in just to kind of match the body. And I do have a couple hackles sticking out the front, but you can always get rid of those pretty easy. So yeah, no, that's
you
that's
just call them antenna. Just call them antenna.
Yeah, antennas. Yeah. I do that once in a while. Like, that was intentional.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, guys, any of you have any questions for Andrew at this time?
No.
He must have covered it pretty good. All right, so
so my uni thread that I have is I think it's let me see, it's 6/0.
Okay.
Will that can you separate that too?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can spread it. It just once it's bound on. I mean, I used to use 6/0 before they got the 8/0.
Okay.
Okay. It's just a simple matter of once you're bound on, whether remembering which way to turn it as to which way to spread it out or to tighten it up.
Okay.
And that takes me a little bit of I'm sitting there looking at the fly, and it's like, okay, I need to flatten this out. Okay, so I'm spin it. Okay, no, that's the wrong way. Spin it the other way. No, backwards and forwards a couple of times before. It's like, oh, okay, I see what I'm doing. You might have guessed with my glasses, my eyesight's not the best. I mean, now I can't see you at all. You guys are just blurry. So that's what, but I can see the vise, the tip of the vise perfectly. But now, once again, I can't see the vise at all. In fact, if it wasn't for the glasses, I'd run right into it. So
Okay.
you guys look like you probably see better than me, so it might take you less turns than me. But the idea basically is play with it, you know?
Okay.
And then maybe what about materials? Are there some maybe specific materials, say like a hackle, like this grizzly hackle here, as opposed to say like some chenille? Is there a better technique? Sorry, it's dirty. It's been shaved on. I mean, clean the hooks and it got dirty. But is there a difference between, say, tying in a hackle with a flat thread as opposed to, like, say, a chenille?
Okay, so I've already mentioned spinning deer hair using flatter, wider thread, because your finer thread will slice the hair as opposed to crush it. Your finer thread, that when you spin your thread nice and tight, is going to have more bite. So depending on what you're wanting to tie, if I'm tying a hackle in for like a dry fly, or for any kind of a hackle type thing, where I'm wrapping the hackle, the ratchets of the hackle around the hook, so I want it to be anchored good and tight, then I'll spin it nice and tight and have a real fine thread to bite hard. Okay, if I'm with dubbing, then I'm fine with a wider thread, because maybe, I mean, especially if I'm going to split the thread and put the dubbing in the thread. Okay, but basically where I'm not wanting to really bite down on something and keep it tight. One of the places where I do an awful lot of this sort of thing is when I'm putting a gut loop on a salmon fly to make the eye, or when I'm tying a blind eye hook to a piece of gut. You have to do, and I should have brought some of this out here. You have to take, and maybe I can sort of partly demonstrate here with this big gold hook here that's I have to take and unwrap from. Okay, so imagine, let me put the other vise in here. I'm still using the same vices that I got back when I was in my late teens. I started tying in hand before that. I got a vise. I came out of the Army and I had a little bit of money and was a bit lazy, and so I got a vise because it's quicker than tying in hand. Okay, so if I'm going to tie in some guts, so I'm going to use this piece of silk floss to represent the gut. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to have an underbody on that gut, or on the hook, so that the gut will bite into it, so that when I wrap over it, then it's going to bind the gut in there nice and tight, because the last thing you want is for the fish to bite the hook. And of course you're using a gut loop, so the fish will grab the hook, and if the gut's not in there nice and tight, your line is attached to the gut. He grabs the hook and pulls, and you set the hook the other way, and the hook goes one way and the fly goes the other.
Did that a few weeks back. It was heartbreaking.
I imagine it would be.
It would have been the biggest bass I ever caught.
And that is because the gut loop wasn't bound in there tight. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to bind on, okay, and then I'm going to make sure that my thread is nice and twisted, nice and tight, so that and I'm going to build up here, and this will be waxed as well, which I'm playing again with the silk floss to show you, okay. You want the wax because when you're doing the blind eye hooks and the gut loop, you want the thread to stay where it is, and the wax acts almost like glue, okay? So I keep it nice so that the gut will have something to bite into, okay? So there we go, and I'll trim that ugly bit off right there, and then let's take this. We're going to pretend the eye's not there. So then we take, and this is our pretend gut loop. We're going to lay it underneath. Okay, lay it underneath like so. And then we're going to take, once again, spin it nice and tight and wrap forward. Being, if it was gut, it would be stiff and it wouldn't do that. But we're going to bring it forward so that now we're going to have to keep this nice and tight. This would be easier if it was real gut. Okay, bring it forward nice and tight so that now when the fish grabs hold of it, and they've got to be close, touching and tight. Okay, I'm having to do this to make sure that the pretend gut stays in where it's supposed to.
Now, when you say gut, what are you referring to?
Silkworm gut. It's the material that they make the eyes with, or eyes from, I should say, on a blind eye salmon hook.
Okay.
So anyway, so here's our pretend silkworm gut eye. Okay, this eye here is not there. So when we take it, I'm going to trim this out right here. It's a good thing that this uni floss is cheap. There we go. So now, pretending that this eye is not there, when I go to tie my fly, I've got a nice smooth underbody here. I can tie a good fly on there, trim all that off. This is what you're going to tie your fishing line to, is here. Okay, now that being said, if I hadn't done a proper job of this underbody, first of all, the fly, if you look at some of these silk bodies on your salmon flies, the silk body would be hideous. It'd be all lumpy and nasty, okay? But that aside, the first time the fish grabs hold of it, you're tied on right there. He's going to grab, and this whole thing's going to slip. The hook is going to pop right out, okay? And you're going to be left with this. all that work, and some of these flies can take 4 or 5 hours to tie, all that work and expense, and he just took off with it. And all you have is the gut loop and this bit here and some of the stuff there, but the hook is gone, and that's a $10 hook at best. You know what I mean? It could be even worse than that. So
Wow.
you really want to take and make sure that your underbody is, especially when you're doing this kind of stuff, your underbody's, and so if you're doing the gut loop, it's nice and tight so the gut's got something to bind into. If you're doing silk, and then if you're doing salmon flies on an eyed hook, so let's take that out of there. You're doing salmon flies on an eyed hook, okay? In all instances, if you're doing a silk body, you want a nice, smooth underbody, okay? And this is where, so you've got, if your tying thread is nice, this is where you start with your silk wrapping forward. And if there's any imperfections in the underbody, you'll start to see them immediately. And if
Yeah, that's a fact. I've kind of just made up my own salmon flies because I don't have all the required materials because of, you know, a lot of them are kind of expensive and selective. So, but I've kind of dabbled in that, and definitely I'll use a lot of the time instead of silk just because it's cheaper. It's like uni thread, and I'll just pull off a whole lot of it. Lay it flat and you kind of use that as a silk. But
right.
But you're right. You're right about the underbody. You can definitely see any kind of movement in that underbody when you try to tie nice stuff like that.
Okay, now I'm going to take the vise out of the pedestal and move it closer. And with any luck, I can show you what I've got there. You can see here where there's imperfections, because what I was doing, first of all, I've done two separate things on this. I was showing an underbody with the pretend silk gut. Okay, so I started at this end underneath it, all tight. So it's going to create slight little lumps. Each turn of thread is going to create a little ridge. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not smooth and flat. When we changed out, I left the first wrap down to here in place. So now when I came back nice and smooth in a pretend salmon fly or steelhead silk body, okay, you can see where underneath here, the reflection of the thread wraps from underneath. And because I had stopped when I did the pretend gut here, I flattened out there and then flattened back. And so you can see this taper underneath here. And the taper is smooth here because it was a flat wrap over a flat wrap going back. But here, as soon as it gets to where I have used the twisted tight, as we would if we were going to have a gut loop under there, you can see just ever so faint the
Yep.
See
just
that?
A little lip.
Yeah, I see it.
Yep.
Just a little lip.
Yep. So if the underbody, if your underbody is not right, your overbody won't be, and you'll have to compensate. And if you're a perfectionist, like I can be sometimes, I'm going to take that all down and put it back the right way. But since this is just demonstration, it illustrates what I wanted to show. Now, if you want a kind of a taper like that without all of that stuff, being aware of how you turn your thread and when, as you're wrapping back and then as you're wrapping forward, you can build up this underbody without those lumps. Or you can do what a lot of people do, which is cheat and take your burnishing tool and very gently fix it. Depends on which way you want to go. When I say cheat, some people would think that has negative implications. Nah, it's just a different way to fix it.
Yeah.
Shortcut. You know what I'm saying? It's all fair in fly tying. Make sense?
Yeah.
But that there is taking thread control. You've gone from controlling really fine thread to the next thing up, which is your silk floss. Now, if I've built up, let's say I'm building up a body for a tinsel streamer, okay, and I want a slight forward taper, okay. If I was to lay tinsel over what I've just done, my tinsel is going to lay lumpy, because not only do I have small lumps underneath from the underbody, but they've been magnified slightly, so even I can see them. In the second wrap forward, the tinsel that I put over that is going to magnify them even more. Make sense? Now,
absolutely.
there's ways you can fix that. You can either not wrap your tinsel forward until you fix the underbody, or what some people do who don't care is they'll wrap the tinsel and then throw some turns of oval gold tinsel and try to hide the lumps with the tinsel. That's ugly, but some people do it. You know what I'm saying?
Now you're specifically talking about an extra wrap of tinsel over itself to hide the lump?
They'll take oval tinsel and make a rib on your flat tinsel, because the oval tinsel is going to be lumped anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So yeah, so for those of you who don't know what he's talking about is, so you have like Mylar. I assume that's what you're talking about. Is just like some Mylar.
Yeah, you got some flat tinsel as a body,
right?
And you take your oval tinsel, like that stuff there. Yep. Except they'll usually use a heavier gauge of that, and they'll wrap that over as a ribbing. Okay, because what your eye will do is you'll see the ribbing, the tinsel ribbing, and you won't see, especially if you lay your ribbing just right to kind of camouflage those ugly little lumps underneath there.
Right.
Camouflage the imperfections. Okay, and the fish don't care. You can get away with it. But if you're wanting to tie competition type flies, or if you're really wanting to tie that fly that looks lovely, you're not going to do that. You're going to take and undo your tinsel and make that underbody properly, so that when you lay your tinsel out, it's smooth the way it should be. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And you can still throw your oval over that, but it'll lay even better, look much prettier. Okay.
Very cool.
So that's thread control. That's all thread control is what you can do with it. And once you've got your tying thread, then you can take and go to your tinsel or your flosses and stuff like that. And it's the same exact principles, just they're larger. Okay. Easier to see with, but as we saw in the demonstration, harder to deal with because they can really spread out and get out of hand. You know? So anyway.
Well, any other questions for Andrew?
No, that was great.
Thank you. That's the one thing. If when I was a little kid learning how to tie, if somebody had said that's the thing you got to play with, everything else comes out of that, practice your thread control, I'd had a lot easier time of it. You know, the reason I didn't quit is because the very first fly I tied, some guy came along and stole it, and I thought, well, if it's good enough to steal, I'll do some more. But it was this little, there it is, this little fly here that kept me going, because this catches fish. And in the first probably 100 of these that I tied, I had no idea about thread control, but I knew that it had to be smooth. Lay the thread down to the bend and bring it back. All the wraps next to each other, right? But as I started realizing you can turn the thread and you can play with the thread and you can flatten whatever, as the fly is looking better, I felt better about it and fished it more and more and more. And I'll say again, this fly by itself has caught more fish for me than every single other fly I've ever tied. So, and big ones too, not just little flies. Or little fish, big ones. So.
Yeah, it's amazing some of the stuff that they eat. Like I saw somebody explain the other day. Well, it's kind of like a buffet down there, right? You're going to eat 50 or 60 plates to get your belly full, mm-hmm. right? If you're eating bunch of little stuff like that. So I thought that was a good analogy.
Yeah, and the thing with that particular little fly, as I said, the naturals are about 1/2 inch long. They're big. We're looking at size 12 to a size 10. But you can throw that fly as a size 10 out there, even if you put a nice white, because the naturals are black and white banded. You can throw that out there and they won't touch it. But you throw that little tiny black one out there and it breaks that selectivity. You know, there they are sipping the naturals, and then they see that one that looks nothing like it, and they'll nail it. And sometimes they'll nail it hard enough to actually come right out of the water when they do it. So, anyway, at the risk of being redundant, you know, that's the thing that if anybody asks me, that's the thing that I needed to know, and that's the thing when I'm teaching newbies. That's what I tell them first. Learn to control your thread, and everything comes from that. Because the next thing after that is dubbing. Okay? Once you can build a nice underbody, you can lay your tinsels and stuff like that, then you can do your dubbings and your chenilles and your other types of bodies where you can get a little sloppy. You can get a bit sloppy because at that point you know what you're doing, as opposed to you're just being sloppy because you got no idea what you're doing. Make sense?
Yep.
And you still feel good about them because it's like you know how to compensate and you get it out in the water and fish it. And that's the ultimate theirs. If you're not happy with your fly, you're not going to fish it. So, all right, I'll shut up now and open it up to if anybody.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
No.
Nope.
I gotta tie better under.
Well,
it's definitely important when you come to. I mean, I did a little YouTube video on the importance of an underbody, and I kind of rushed it. I was new to it, so it's kind of dull and drab. But how you break your fly into thirds, so you have abdomen plus taper maybe, and then your thorax and head get kind of lumped into one, or sometimes split in half into two. But building a solid underbody for little flies like this, I've always found is extremely important, because if you go out to the river and you turn rocks over, and you're going to see these like ridiculously small little insects crawling on them, and that's what the fish are eating. You know, and this would be a big one. But that third. Knowing when and where to start your thread and how to lay it flat and spin it up when you need to is crucial. It's like I said, it took me forever to learn, and I finally found it. I finally had this like aha moment watching I'm pretty sure it was a Barry Ord Clark video. But you're right, it's not talked about a lot, and it's detrimental to making solid flies. So. I was glad to have you on and explain some of your techniques. You're much wiser than I am. You have way more experience. So
experience with wisdom, yeah, that's different. Experience, yeah, wisdom, no.
Right.
But seriously, guys, if you proportions is what I was going to talk about next time. But tie a bunch of these. Tie a bunch of these little things, size 16s. Black is the killer. But again, you can do olives, light olives, dark olives with matching hackle, or light olives, dark olives, chartreuses with a white hackle. You could do red with a red hackle. You could do red with a white hackle. I've even added one turn of white onto this thing. They all work in size 16. But the most killing is the one I'm holding in my fingertips right here. And it's a simple 2 wraps of thread down to the bend and back, and 3 or 4 wraps of black ostrich, and that's all there is to it. On a size 16 Mustad 94840, which is a light wire dry fly hook, because you want to fish it in the surface film. It doesn't go down very far. You're fishing on there you go. You're fishing
on a 12
film.
I just happened to have it here. I looked at the number. I was like, hey, I got that hook here.
Yep. So that's a 12. But
right, yeah.
This is hanging in the surface film. You've got a 2-pound leader, or one on the whatever the lightest leader is you can get. I fish 2-pound because that's the lightest I can get. But you can flip this out with a spinning rod and a casting bubble and 10 feet of 2-pound leader. You can flip this out with a fly rod and 10 feet of leader, and you just basically, when you retrieve, you just keep the line straight. There's no motion to it at all. Just keep the line straight and dead slow. And you'll know when they're biting. There's absolutely no doubt about it. They don't come at you. They come straight away. And half the time they come right out of the water when they hit the end of the line. It's self-hooking. And I've had them take it right down to the gut. So and that's the other thing about it.
Completely engulf it. I'm eating this now.
Yeah. And so that's the other thing about this. You're not going to care. If you're doing if you're doing catch and release, as you bring the fish in, it's like, oh my God, he's got it right down to his gut. Cut the line and tie on a new one.
Right. Yeah.
It's not going to hurt the fish. It's going to rust out of him real quick. He's not going to care.
Right.
He's going to be back at feeding on this within the hour probably. But in the meantime, you just tie on another one. So what? It took you 30 seconds to tie it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's pretty close to a 30-second tie if you get proficient at it, for sure. Now you said bluegills and you caught a bass on this little pattern as well, and
I've got bluegills. I've got small bass. I say small bass, I'm talking about hand-sized. Because that's what was in the pond at the time.
Sure.
I'm sure there were bigger ones, but I mean there was one that hit my casting bubble way back when I was younger. Hit the casting bubble, but back then when I was fishing this pond, mostly what was in there was bluegills and a lot of small bass, and they'll hit that thing just like everything else.
Very cool. Anybody else? He's got a fishing trip in the morning, so I don't want to keep him. So
yeah, I gotta pack the truck. I gotta be up at 4 a.m. because I gotta be at the dock at 6.
My heart's bleeding for you.
I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to a 16-month-old and a 4-year-old at crack of dawn. So
yeah, I did
not
that
quite fishing.
I did that 30 years ago.
Maybe.
So she's now 30 years old, and best thing that ever happened. But yeah, I know what you feel. I know what you're into. So
well, yeah. Very cool. Well, I wanted to thank you again for coming on. That was a great demonstration. I know we've kind of had this in the works now for probably a month and a half or so. So it's very cool.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you guys' patience and stuff with the demonstrations and stuff. Next time I'll try and have figured out a way to get the flies closer to the camera. Maybe I just have to tie everything in hand. It's kind of harder if I'm doing it in hand. It's kind of harder for you guys to see because, well, let's see. Where's this? I've only got 2 size hooks here. I've either got the size 16, which is most of the stuff I tie in hand is on that size hooks. Okay. Or I've got these big buggers here. Okay. Either way, tying in hand is harder to see, and it's harder to relate to what you guys are doing unless you're actually tying in hand yourself. But the basic concepts are the same. It's thread control. So with thread control tying in hand, I have to wrap it around my fingers or put it in catch, which is putting it between the shank and the gut loop and snagging it in there so it stays so I can put the fly down, because otherwise, well, if the thread's loose, you can't put the fly down because it'll unravel. Okay. Yeah, it makes for some interesting mistakes every once in a while. But proportions.
Yeah, after 4 hours of work, yeah, you're like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah. Proportions are exactly the same thing as you would on a dry fly hook or on a regular modern hook, on a modern vise. The proportions, that's what they've been dealing with that for, since 200 AD when the first fly came in, or at least the first one we have record of. So.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not trying to drag this into a different direction, but I remember we had a conversation several months back about, or this probably before Christmas actually, but I was like, yeah, I watched some documentary, and they ended up mentioning the Egyptians fly fishing back like 5,000 years ago, or they think that's what the what do they call it? The hieroglyph is depicting is them fly fishing.
Yeah, there are definite hieroglyphs of Egyptians, guys with rods and lines and a fly.
Lines, yeah, and a fly, yeah.
The only thing we don't know is if they were, because this was also common practice, we've all done it, if they were fishing with a live insect on the end of a hook, or if they were fishing with a representation of an insect on a hook. Now, what we do know that is by 200 AD, which is the Macedonian fly from Aeneas, or whatever his name was, he writes of not just the Macedonian fly, which is a scarlet wool body with two feathers the color of honey from underneath the wattles of a chicken. Okay, so that's your standard rooster hackle. But he doesn't say what you do with it. He just says, you know, that's tied in. He doesn't say how the fly is tied. So I just sent off 4 versions of that to my friend in Texas, 4 interpretations of what the thing could possibly look like. But he also talks about the Greeks tuna fishing with flies and describes some of the materials that they use, not necessarily the fly itself. So they were fishing tuna with flies. But he also talks about them having hooks small enough to impale midges on and tying flies on those. So fly fishing by 200 AD, fly fishing was very clearly, I mean, with artificial flies, was well known and done. Okay.
Yeah, and advanced to some stage for that era, for sure.
Well, yeah, because they I don't know if they were actually dubbing bodies at that point, but they were definitely taking wool. They had wool like we have wool for knitting with now, and wrapping bodies with that, because that's what he talks about, taking red wool and wrapping a body with it.
Wow,
so
that's
that's
pretty neat. But we're kind of getting off topic, and I want to make sure you get up and get your fishing charter. So yeah, definitely, we'll definitely have you back. I think it's been great and very informational. And
well, thank you. Maybe next time. Remind me, maybe next time, if you guys want to see an in hand, I can do the Macedonian flies in hand or something like that. They don't take very long to tie, but it's again the same principles. You got to put the horsehair, because with those use horsehair leaders, you got to put the horsehair on, and then you've got to take and put your materials on. It's the same exact stuff we work through. And if that's something you want to see, I'll show you.
Oh, I'm sure we can find people that want to watch that. I want to watch that.
Yeah,
okay.
I'd like to see it.
Okay, well, we'll set up a time.
We'll set something up on that, or proportions, or whatever. So, but anyway, once again, everybody, this is Andrew Marshall. He was kind enough to join us for a little over an hour. We got hung up on some technical difficulties, so hopefully we get that fixed sooner than later. We're still learning, but yeah, once again, thanks for coming on and showing us what you know, and
My pleasure.
explaining anything. And have you joined our Facebook group?
I haven't, because I should.
I'll tell you what. I'll send you an invite, and that way when we post the video, if anybody has any questions that they think of later, would you be willing to answer those in the group?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, cool. Yeah, very cool. So, well, thanks everybody for showing up. Brian, Shane, and Mike, which looks like he kind of dipped out, but that's cool. Everybody, it's kind of late, but once again, been very beneficial, and thank you.
My pleasure. Nice meeting you guys. Take care.
Yeah,
Thank you. All right.
Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah, good
Thanks.
luck.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
fun.
Yep. Have a good night.
Good night.